4.1 Develop Project Charter. Develop Project Charter is the process of developing a document that formally authorises the existence of a project and provides a project manager with the authority to apply organisational resources to project activities. And as I mentioned in the module overview, this is an important definition to remember. The key benefits of this process are that it provides a direct link between the project and the strategic objectives of the organisation, creates a formal record of the project and shows the organisational commitment to the project. This process is performed once or at predetermined points in the project, and it's from the PMBOK Guide, page 75. The Project Charter establishes a partnership between the performing organisation and the requesting organisation. Formal contracts are the preferred way to deliver external projects because all contracts carry the ability to pursue legal remedy should one party default on the other. A charter is not considered a contract because there's no promise of payment involved, and please remember that for the examination too. We'll cover contracts in more detail in the module on project procurement management. The PMBOK Guide uses the term partnership for project charters rather than the term binding relationships as you would expect to see in a contract, because charters are usually considered for internal projects and it is the project team delivering a project for their employer, and of course one part of an organisation can't have a contract with another part because they are both the same legal entity. But even though the internal and external organisations, i.e. the performing organisation and the customer, use a formal contract to establish a project agreement between them, either organisation or both may also create a project charter for use internally for their side of the project. And personally that's what I do, to ensure it remains aligned with the contract. Please note the following for the exam. Often these appear in questions. The project manager is assigned to the project as early as is feasible and should always be prior to the start of planning and preferably while the project charter is still being developed. The project charter can be developed by the sponsor or the project manager in collaboration with the initiating entity. The approved project charter formally initiates the project, formally authorises the project manager to plan, execute and control the project, formally authorises the project manager to use organisational resources for the work of the project. It makes a lot of sense for the project manager to be in place as early as possible because that means they will have the best opportunity to help shape it and subsequently manage it. Some people get hung up on the project manager creating the charter. They say the project manager doesn't get formally appointed to the project until the charter is signed, and so they can't create it. The simple answer is that in most companies the project manager has been informally selected before the project begins, and even if it is a different project manager than the one who will actually manage a project, they should have the skills to create a proper charter, but the project sponsor may not have the skills. Getting the project manager involved very early in the project makes a lot of sense because if they aren't there early, you can be pretty sure that people will make all sorts of silly decisions about the project, and then the project manager will have to live with them. And this means that the project will be less efficient than it could have been. Another major benefit of involving the project manager early is that they can collaborate with the customer and will be given a chance to find out what the customer actually wants. Because what the customer actually says they want and what they actually want may not be the same thing. Missing out on this important first step can lead to the project heading down the wrong path, and then time and resources will be wasted bringing the project back into line when it shouldn't have gone off the line in the first place. There's an old saying, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. And this is true, but if the first step is in the wrong direction, it might take 20,000 miles to get there. Projects are often initiated by the project sponsor, but alternatively, it could be the project manager, the project management office, or another senior manager. In fact, the sponsor doesn't have to be a single person. A sponsor can be a group of people and can even be an organisation acts as a sponsor. But whether or not this is the case, a vital consideration is that the sponsor must be of sufficiently high level in the organisation to be able to commit resources and funding to the project. Another reason for the sponsor to be high ranking is that the sponsor is the person that the project manager will go to if they need more resources or funding, or if they hit a problem that needs a decision from senior management. And a sponsor should also be a champion for the project and encourage support for it among senior management. Okay, it's time to learn about the cookbooks and ITOs. The processes in the PMBOK guide have a cookbook structure. Imagine that you're going to bake a cake. The recipe will include the ingredients for the cake, the instructions for baking it, and a description of the end product. To keep it simple, your ingredients might be self-rising flour, sugar, eggs, milk, vinegar and salt. The instructions might be sift the dry ingredients together, mix the wet ingredients, then fold into the dry ingredients, pour into a greased baking tin and bake at 180 degrees Celsius for 20 minutes, and the output will be a cake. Each process in the PMBOK guide has a cookbook recipe too. Here is the one for Develop Process Charter process. The inputs are like the ingredients, the tools and techniques are like the baking instructions, and the outputs are the final result of following the recipe. You will be reading about inputs, tools and techniques and outputs often in the PMBOK guide. As I mentioned in the module overview, most study guides use the acronym ITOs instead of inputs, tools, techniques and outputs, but you will not see this acronym in the PMP exam. Let's examine the inputs to this process. Sometimes the inputs are part of a group. When that happens, for example, the business case and benefits management plan, you will see the group name in the list, in this case business documents, preceded by a number, and the actual members of the group will appear as bullet points, as we see in figure 4.2. Now, if you're really familiar with the PMBOK guide previous editions and you're going, I don't understand any of this, that's because this grouping is new to the PMBOK guide 6th edition and just reinforces what I said earlier. Even if you're a black belt in PMBOK, you still need to learn this new version, the 6th edition, or you're simply going to fall behind and you're going to lose relevance as a project manager, and we don't want that to happen. An important point to remember is that PMI has sorted the inputs and outputs into order of importance or order of relevance where possible. For example, the primary purpose of Develop Project Charter process is to develop the project charter, of course. And if we look at figure 4.2, we see project charter appears in the first position, which is where we expect it. Let's have a look at them in more detail, starting with the inputs. Number 1 is the business documents. Now stop there for a moment, because I can see this being a big area of confusion. This is fairly new with the PMBOK guide 6th edition. We have 33 project documents in a project, but they are not the same as these documents. There's 2 business documents, 33 project documents. We're talking about business documents here. So number 1, business documents, and there's only 2 of them. There's the business case and the benefits management plan. The documents contain high-level information about the project, including why the organisation wishes to initiate the project, what it will achieve, and how it will support the aims of the organisation. They are sources of information about the project's objectives and how the project will contribute to the business goals. The PMBOK guide tells us the approved business case or similar is the business document that most commonly used to create the project charter. The business case describes the necessary information from a business standpoint to determine whether the expected outcomes of the project justify the required investment. It is commonly used for decision making by managers or executive above the project level. Typically, the business need and the cost-benefit analysis are contained in the business case to justify and establish boundaries for the project. A business case is created in response to some form of trigger. Examples of triggers include Market demand. For example, an increase in the reported number of shark attacks might encourage a surfboard and swimwear company to authorize a project to develop a small electronic device that can repel sharks. Organizational need. For example, a large company may have taken over a smaller company and it authorizes a project to manage the merger. Customer request. A building company may authorize a project to build a skateboard park for a local city council. Technological advance. A smartphone manufacturer may authorize a project to enable contactless payments to be made via a phone. Legal requirement. A company may authorize a project to ensure that it will comply with changes to records management legislation. Ecological impacts. For example, a horticultural company may authorize a project to develop a non-toxic weed killer. Social need. For example, a humanitarian organization might authorize a project to create a small self-contained cabin for homeless people. Please note for the exam that the project manager uses the business documents but does not update them, because business documents are not project documents. The project manager can request that the business documents be modified, but the project manager is not authorized to make any changes. The next input to the project management charter process is number 2, agreements. The PMBOK guide tells us that agreements are used to define initial intentions for a project. Agreements may take the form of contracts, memorandums of understanding, service level agreements, letters of agreement, letters of intent, verbal agreements, email or other written agreements. Typically a contract is used when a project is being performed for an external customer. Input number 3 is the enterprise environmental factors, and for this process they are government or industry standards, e.g. product standards, quality standards, safety standards and workmanship standards. Legal and regulatory requirements and or constraints. What are constraints? Constraints are conditions that limit the project manager's ability to manage a project. For example, if the project manager is working towards a tight deadline, but the union will not permit any staff members to work overtime, then this is a constraint because it reduces the project manager's ability to meet the deadline. Marketplace conditions, organizational culture and political climate, organizational governance framework. This is a structured way to provide control, direction and coordination through people, policies and processes to meet the organizational, strategic and operational goals. Stakeholders' expectations and risk thresholds. A risk threshold is a level of risk an organization or key stakeholder is willing to bear. It's also known as a risk appetite. This is important because a huge multinational organization may be happy to risk losing several $1 million on a major project, yet a small family business may refuse to risk losing a few $1,000s. Most times that you see enterprise environmental factors as an input to a process, the very next input is organizational process assets. For the exam, I'd recommend remembering which processes have enterprise environmental factors as an input but do not have organizational process assets, because PMI likes to test your knowledge of exceptions. And you'll find in many study guides enterprise environmental factors and organizational process assets are referred to as EEFs and OPAs, and in fact that's what they do in the PMBOK guide as well, but when they appear in the exam you can expect the full name to be inside brackets too. Input number 4, organizational process assets that can influence the develop project charter process include organizational standard policies, processes and procedures, portfolio, program and project governance framework, governance functions and processes to provide guidance and decision making, monitoring and reporting methods, templates, e.g. project charter template, and historical information and lessons learned from developing project charters for previous projects. So you can learn what worked well, what didn't on previous similar projects, and use these to help you improve your project. That's the end of the inputs. By the way, PMI constantly reminds us that the inputs, tools and techniques and outputs that they have listed for each process are what it considers to be the minimum, and that you might want to add others. And in fact, you might find examples of other inputs, tools and techniques and outputs that your organisation has used by looking through the lessons learned, and so it might be able to tell you how useful those extra processes were. Now we come to the tools and techniques. Number one is expert judgment. In general, expert judgment means the educated opinion of a trained, qualified and experienced person or group of people, and or they have a lot of relevant experience in similar projects. In the case of the developed project charter process, we're looking for people with expert knowledge in organisational strategy, benefits management, technical knowledge of the industry and focus area of the project, duration and budget estimation, and risk identification. You are very unlikely to find all this knowledge and experience in one person, and so especially at this early critical stage, you are more likely looking at using a small team to provide the expert judgment. When I'm at this stage of a project, I try to get the experts into one room at the same time. It's not easy, especially if they're busy people, but sometimes I've achieved it by holding a meeting in a coffee shop or in a cafe with a paid for lunch. In a larger project, I would strongly recommend using a facilitator to run the sessions so you get the information you need in the shortest time. The reason I like to get the experts together is because some experts can actually make mistakes. But if you have a few experts together, the others will correct the mistakes. Tools and techniques number 2 is data gathering, and the recommended methods for these are the brainstorming. Brainstorming is usually done best assisted by a facilitator to keep the group on track and to stop them squabbling. The basic principle of brainstorming is to generate a lot of ideas and then to filter them down to end up with just a few of the best ideas. Focus groups. These bring stakeholders and subject matter experts together to discuss project risk, opportunities, success criteria and so on. Interviews, and unlike focus groups which are based on informal discussion, interviews are direct and usually one-on-one. The interviewer may ask whatever they feel like asking, or they may work from a script of questions. Typical questions would be related to high-level project requirements, assumptions or constraints, acceptance criteria and other areas. Next tool and technique is number 3, interpersonal and team skills, which could include conflict management. And this can be used to help stakeholders bring them into alignment on the objectives and the success criteria and the high-level requirements, the project description, the summary milestones and other elements of the charter. Facilitation. This is the ability to effectively guide a group event to a successful decision, solution or conclusion. A facilitator ensures that there is effective participation, that participants achieve a mutual understanding, that all contributions are considered, people don't get ignored or left out or worse, that conclusions or results have full buy-in according to the decision process established for the project, and the actions and agreements achieved are appropriately dealt with afterwards. Meeting management. This includes preparing the agenda, ensuring that a representative for each key stakeholder group is invited, and preparing and sending the follow-up minutes and actions. Tools and techniques number 4, meetings. For this process, meetings are held with key stakeholders to identify the project objectives, success criteria, key deliverables, high-level requirements, summary milestones, and other summary information. Develop project charter outputs. Number 1, as you'd expect, is the project charter. The PMBOK guide tells us the project charter is a document issued by the project initiator or sponsor that formally authorises the existence of the project and provides the project manager with the authority to apply organisational resources to project activities. It documents the high-level information on the project and on the product, service or result the project is intended to satisfy, such as the project purpose, measurable project objectives and related success criteria, Please note that the project objectives must be measurable. To increase sales is not an objective, it's subjective. An objective might be to increase sales by 7%. High-level requirements. Everything in the charter is high level because you haven't done any detailed planning yet. And in fact, you haven't actually done any high-level planning yet either, because this project doesn't exist until the project charter has been signed. High-level project descriptions, boundaries and key deliverables, overall project risk, summary milestone schedule. This gives us an indication of when major achievements are expected to occur and when other major deliverables are expected. And it could also include things like major procurements could be on it. Pre-approved financial resources, key stakeholder list, project approval requirements, e.g. what constitutes project success, who decides a project is successful and who signs off the project. Project exit criteria, i.e. what are the conditions to be met in order to close or cancel the project or phase. Just because you've handed over the products doesn't mean you can simply close the door and have an end of project celebration party. Name of the assigned project manager, their responsibility and authority level, and the name and authority of the sponsor or other person or persons authorising the project charter. The project charter is high level, 1 or 2 page document which is relatively easy to understand. It's certainly much easier to understand than a 200-page project management plan, and its high level helicopter view of the project helps ensure that there's a common understanding among stakeholders of the key deliverables, milestones, roles and responsibilities of the key people involved in the project. Output number 2, the final output, is the assumption log. This, despite just being called an assumption log, contains details of constraints and assumptions. They will be maintained throughout the project and will hold the constraints and assumptions at the lower detail level than on the charter. And that brings us to the end of the develop project charter process. Please remember to revise the purposes of the project charter and how it relates to the project manager for the exam. It's an important topic. The next lesson in the module is 4.2, develop project management plan. Please read that corresponding chapter in the Pinball Guide before watching the video.